I think that's a great question. I think that for me, if I had read this book and knowing the author's story being very similar to mine, right? Another person in the business world where I spend most of my time that has, and as an athlete, I was a former very highly successful college athlete, step up and say, you know what, I'm broken. I need help. And I think that if I had seen that, I would have said, this is me. I need help. And it might have triggered me to take the next step. And for me, though, what I was doing was basically going from one pain to the next and numbing that pain with alcohol or, working too much or traveling and just trying to disappear. And so I think it would have pushed me over the edge to say, you know what, this is me. I need help.
Everyone, welcome back to Living the Next Chapter. I have another great author on with me today. Really nice to have James Francis on with me. We're going to be talking through his writing, his background, and all this great stuff. And again, it's always exciting to have another author on the podcast to kind of share the journey. And James, nice to have you here on the podcast. Welcome.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. So can you let everybody know where you are in this big, great world of ours?
I live in the state of Connecticut in the United States. I'm originally from New York, and we've been in Connecticut for about 28 years or so.
Nice. Excellent. When did your author journey start for you?
I started to formally write a book about 8 years ago. And essentially it was a conglomeration of journals that I had been working on for years as I went through my mental health exploration. And I really sat down to formally finish the book right before COVID. And so December of 2019, I basically blocked out time every day, sat down for about 6 months and formally wrote the book start to finish. And so it's been an 8 to 10 year project. Let's put it that way.
So why is this topic so important for you personally?
Well, I was invited to speak to a group of people. This is going back about 2 years or so. I had a friend that runs a speaking group called the Happiness Club. And they've got chapters all over the place. And he invited me to talk. I had met him through a mutual friend, told him a little bit about my story, which was essentially suffering from severe bouts of depression for almost 30 years, a lot of anxiety, and that culminated in a suicide attempt in 2005. And it was something that I didn't shy away from, and he had asked me about it. And so I talked to him a little bit about what I had been through and some of the work that I had done. And he said, you need to come and speak to my group. And so I went to this library in the town of Fairfield, Connecticut. There's about 100 people there. And I basically took people through essentially what is now the book. And when I came out of that session, there were, 50, 70 people waiting for me in the parking lot to talk and expand the discussion. And somebody said, you really need to write this book. This will help a lot of people. There's a lot of men, especially that are afraid to be vulnerable and afraid to admit that they need help. And that was where that idea started to germinate, was to get this down in a book form. At the same time, it also scared me because I didn't want to be a role model around this topic. I was still working through the things that I needed to work through to become healthy, to stay focused on health. And so that's why I had waited so long afterward to really sit down and make this an actual book that I thought would be constructive. And it's helped a lot of people already. In a very small way of getting the story out there and doing speaking engagements and sending the book out into the world, I've gotten so much positive feedback from people that have said, you've helped me to admit that I need help, or somebody's husband or uncle or cousin or friend needed this message. So that's essentially why I'm doing this, is basically to say, hey, I've been through this. It's okay. there is light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak.
Because I guess the perception we get when we see a published book on a shelf by an author, and we look at the title and we're thinking, wow, this person probably has it all put together. They've crossed the finish line. They've climbed the mountain. And now look what I've learned. Come follow me. Come listen to my story. But it sounds like you were writing this while you were still running the race. Is that kind of, that makes sense? Yeah.
That's a very good analogy. And I am still running the race. I think that's the point. It never stops. And I still have bouts of depression. They're very infrequent, and I know how to manage them now for the most part, and I can recognize them very quickly, but it still happens. And I'm a human being, and I get triggered, and I go through stuff that, aggravates me. And so I'm just this regular dude going through life, just like everybody else. And what I'm asking people to do is take a step back and try to recognize the things that they need to do in order to identify when they might be having a problem, and then the work that needs to happen in order to get through that. And I think that for me, and I talk about this in the book, going back, decades and having conversations with my wife, and I've been married for 35 years now. She was always and is always a very happy person. And I remember having these conversations about, what that actually means. I just couldn't understand it. I didn't understand what happiness was, and the meaning of being able to sort of embrace life without letting the bad stuff that happens in a given day take you down a rabbit hole. And so I do think that it is an ongoing thing, right? This work is an ongoing thing. And I think that's ultimately the message, is that happy days can happen and will happen. There's so many days where there's positive things that will happen that you lose yourself in the negative thoughts that we experience if somebody's going through anxiety, depression, or whatever their mental health issue might be.
Well, let's go back out to the parking lot by the library for a second. You're talking to someone out there in the parking lot, and they feel like they're mid-journey, they're running the race, but they don't feel that they're ready to write yet because they feel like they have to get to the finish line first. From your perspective, what would you say to people? Because I'm thinking there's authors that have a powerful, amazing story that's unfolding in real time that they could share, but they feel like they have to wait till they've succeeded or accomplished something before they write. What would you say to that author that may be listening to our conversation?
I think that there's a major value in sharing whatever it is that you're experiencing, as long as it's real and honest and it's coming from your heart. Regardless of whether you think you figured it out or you're halfway there or 100% there, it doesn't matter. Everybody's story, everybody's connection with others is important, is critically important. And so what I would say is just sit down and start writing. It doesn't need to make sense. Just get it down on paper. And part of my roadmap to health is journaling and sitting down and writing my journal, daily, as often as possible. To me, that's writing a book. And if you go back and look at your journal over the past 6 months after you've written some things down, and maybe you didn't write every day, but who cares? That's a book. And then sharing that with somebody else that is in the business or is interested in providing you with some critical feedback, constructive feedback, I think is really helpful. And I want to know the people in my life and what their life is about. And so I think that that's where the value in just sitting down and writing is important. And I think we're all afraid of trying to be perfect, and perfection just doesn't exist.
So would you say that this book that you've written is for you personally, or is it written for someone else, or maybe a combination of both?
It's a little bit of both at this point. I started the book for me. It was a cathartic process. It was part of my therapy. It was part of my journey to understand who I am and why, and really to get my feelings down on paper. And the only person that I shared my writing with initially was my wife. And it was essentially an opportunity for us to talk about these topics and sort of create a bridge from what she was feeling, what I was feeling, and maybe not communicating, and opening up the dialogue for the conversation that needed to happen. And so I would write something, she would read it, we would talk about it, Sometimes we argued, sometimes we cried, sometimes we laughed. But that was how it started. It really started as a tool for me to go through this catharsis. It really didn't formulate into a formal book, something with a beginning, a middle, and an end until I sat down right before COVID and basically said, look, if this thing is going to go out into the world, if I'm going to share this message, it really needs to be a real book. And for me, a real book is something that holds people's interest from start to finish. And so that's what I've tried to accomplish.
And I love that when we talked earlier, you shared the story behind the name of the book. And I'd kind of like to revisit that as well and talk about that. Can you share how the book got its title?
Yeah. So the book is called There's Coffee in the Fridge, One Man's Journey Through Anxiety and Depression. And the phrase, there's coffee in the fridge, is very simple. It is about the simple things in life that are magic, not these grandiose things that we all try to experience, right, in our lives. It really is the most simple, minute interaction in your day that brings joy and magic. And so the story behind that is I had attempted suicide. I spent some time in a hospital protecting myself and other people around me because I really wanted to hurt myself. And came out of the hospital, spent some time, about, 2 or 3 years working on myself. And I was a business executive at the time of my suicide attempt. I owned a business and had been doing a lot of traveling. And I hadn't been on a business trip in a long time. And I was preparing for a business trip because I was now getting back into the world and back into my life and managing my anxiety and managing my depression. I had a very early flight one morning, and the night before, I said to my wife, "Hey, I'm going to get up very early, 4 a.m, and I made some coffee. I put it in the fridge. I'm just going to grab it, and I'm going to go to the airport." And I was pretty anxious, right, because I had left this life that I felt like was destroying me, and I was jumping back into that, and so there was a fair amount of anxiety. I woke up at 4 a.m. My wife is generally a night owl. She goes to bed at midnight, sleeps until 8. I typically am the opposite. I go to bed at 9. I wake up at 5. So I got up at 4 a.m. I tiptoed around the bed. I kissed her on the cheek. I said, "I'm going to go." And she turned to me with a big smile on her face and said, "There's coffee in the fridge." And it was a message that I will be with you. You are not alone. We're in this together.
Yeah.
And that message in and of itself was enough to carry me through that entire trip and beyond. But that's what it's all about. It's really simple. It's a really simple connection that we miss through the day when we don't interact with the people around us. And I don't care if it's, somebody you've known for a very long time or somebody that you're going to buy coffee from. It's really just saying, "Hey, I see you." And I think that is something that's critically important in our interactions with people. And that is really the magic in what I'm trying to accomplish here with connection. I think that that's really important.
Did you find that in those early days, as you kind of struggle through and trying to find your place, that people would reach out to you to offer support and love and concern? And did you find that you maybe were pushing some people away to create space for yourself, that you didn't want to hurt people, like your wife, for example? She sounds like a very jovial, happy, fun person to be around. You're not in that space personally yourself right then. Did you find you were kind of pushing people back, or were you allowing them in? Kind of talk about that for a sec.
I think that most of my relationships before I went in the hospital were somewhat superficial. Obviously not with my wife, not with my children.
Yeah.
They were very superficial, very surface level. If you met me, you would think I was fun, I was funny, I was interactive, I worked hard, I had a successful career, and you would not know anything was wrong. But I would not let you in ever. That would be an impossibility. With the people that were closer to me, yes, 100%. I created a wall and distanced myself in certain situations because I believed that they would be better off without me. And I think that was the impetus for my desire to suicide, was really everybody here, everybody that's involved in my life would be much better off if I were not around. And I think that's really a driving force behind that depressive feeling. Not really understanding your value in the world, and for yourself and for everyone else.
So how does this book then address those feelings and approach that topic? Had you read this book back then, how might your path be different today if this book was available to you?
I think that's a great question. I think that for me, if I had read this book and knowing the author's story being very similar to mine, right?
Mhm.
Another person in the business world where I spend most of my time that has, and as an athlete, I was a former very highly successful college athlete, step up and say, you know what, I'm broken. I need help. And I think that if I had seen that, I would have said, this is me. I need help. And it might have triggered me to take the next step. And for me, though, what I was doing was basically going from one pain to the next and numbing that pain with alcohol or, working too much or traveling and just trying to disappear. And so I think it would have pushed me over the edge to say, you know what, this is me. I need help.
So before the book, you had the open door to speak to a group of people, which is amazing. That's awesome to get up there and do that in the early stages. But now that you have the book, what's exciting to you as far as what will this book do to, as far as opening doors for you in the future?
So I've been taking my time in terms of putting this story out there aggressively. I'm not thinking I didn't write the book to sell books. Yeah. It would be nice to get it in front of people and for people to resonate with the story. And ultimately, I believe that will happen organically. I've done several podcasts. I've got, an Instagram page out there. There's coffee in the fridge. I've got a website. I'm doing all the traditional stuff. But my life is very busy. I have a full-time job. I'm the chief operating officer for a startup company in the healthcare space. I coach high school lacrosse. So right now, literally right now, today, my schedule is crazy. And, people say to me, how's the book doing? And I'm like, the book's doing great, but I literally don't have the physical energy right now that I need to go out and do the things that I want. So your question, in the next 2 weeks, lacrosse season will end, and I will start to then look for speaking engagements. I love to get up in front of people or to sit with a group of people and talk about the things that are going on in their lives and the things that obviously I've been through, to sort of make that connection, to do exactly what I said, which is to say, hey, I'm you, you're me, it's okay. And, I want to share my story with as many people as I can, because I want people to understand, really to have an internalization that you might be having a really bad day right now. You might be having a bad month. Hell, you could be having a bad year. Mm. At some point, though, there's a breakthrough. And when you get to the other side, if you're willing to do that work that needs to be done, it's incredibly freeing. And if you had said to me 15 years ago, you know what, you can be happy, I would have said, there's no way. I don't understand how that's possible. And given me this roadmap that I created, I think that I would have embraced it and taken it down that path as aggressively as I could. So I think that what I will do is get out, do some more speaking engagements, continue to build a little bit of a following or an understanding that this is out there, and then we'll see where it goes. I don't have a pre-planned goal of, I want to sell 1,000 books or I want to sell 500 books. It's just an organic thing. And like you said, or like you asked, did you write this book for yourself or did you write it for others? And it is a combination of both. I think that creating this for me allows me to have that freeing experience of it'll go where it's going to go.
So the name of our podcast is Living the Next Chapter. So I have to ask, is there anything, now that the book is done and you read through it and you get feedback and your family reading it and sharing it with the world, is there anything that you would say would be the next chapter that's unwritten in your book that you're like, this is kind of where the book is, this is where the book ends, but here's the next chapter. Here's what's happening now after the book.
I think that there are multiple books inside of this book. And I think that I could go into more granular detail on specific topics. I tell some stories in the book about depression, about anxiety, about sexual abuse. And those three topics in and of themselves could be individual books. And so I do think that there are some other books there. I've actually started to write another book that is about my early business career and the focus that I had on money and success and what we all say is the American dream to a certain extent. And that's another book. So I do think that there are multiple books inside of the book, and I'm not sure which one to tackle first. I want to see how things go over the next, 12 months and what the reaction to this is, and then see which topic I think resonates the most or where there's more interest. And then I'll go down that path.
So before you went into the hospital, what are some of the feelings that you personally were battling with? I'm thinking fear, maybe some shame, some confusion, all of that. What were some of those things that you were really struggling with, and who was there in your corner? I know you're going to say your partner, your spouse, but who was in your corner and what words helped? Maybe what words didn't help in that moment?
Yeah, you're right. A lot of pain, a lot of anger, a lot of frustration, a lot of regret. I think regret and shame are two of the most dangerous things that we can focus on. The reality is that it brings no value. But I also think fear of failure was a huge driving motivation behind my anxiety and embarrassment. Loneliness is a big one. We would go to a party and hang out with a bunch of people and tell stories and laugh and have a seemingly good time. And then I could come home and literally feel like I was totally alone in the world, like that it was such an empty feeling that I just was completely empty. And I was just like, look, if this is what the world is, I don't want any part of it. I don't want to be here. So not being able to make that connection, that having that loneliness and shame about the past, I think is really a destructive force that is hard to get out of. And that drove me to want to leave, to want to just get out of this world. And obviously my wife was in my corner, trying to help. She really had no experience with mental health issues prior to me. And I don't think either one of us understood how powerful that force was. I also really didn't share a lot of the really deep, dark feelings that I was having. I also had some friends, a couple of people that helped me sort of hang on in terms of like having hope. Nobody knew what I was feeling, but those interactions gave me some hope. And then lastly, I think it was my children, my desire for my kids to see me succeed in some way. And I don't mean materially, I just mean, in that relationship. I think that was a huge driving force behind my wanting to stick around. Ironically, on the day when I decided finally that I was going to suicide, I just said, that they would be better off if I'm not here. Interesting thing is that when I was in the hospital, I met a group of people whose parents had suicided. And they were all in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. So they were adults at this point. And some of them, their parents had suicided when they were teenagers. Some had more recently. And the destruction that is left behind when you suicide is palpable. They talked about, obviously, the big question is why. How could you do this to us? Why would you do this? Why was life so unhappy? And I think that when we talk about this topic, it's difficult, right? People don't want to talk about suicide. They don't want to talk about depression, but it needs to be discussed because I've been to so many funerals for people that have actually suicided, and everybody's sitting around saying, God, if he only said something, you know? And so, yeah, I think we need to have that conversation before that happens. And I think that's also part of why I wrote this book, because I want to have the conversation. I want to start the conversation.
It's kind of like a drone view. I like watching those videos of people out for a walk and the drone is above them and you can see a big, wide perspective of what's coming around the corner. You can see things that you can't see while you're just walking on that path because
Mhm.
it's a totally different perspective, right? It's above you and wide where we only see what we see. And I love to kind of give people a sense of what their life means beyond what they're seeing in the moment to
Mhm.
see, hey, stick with us because just around the next bend, there's something beautiful coming. You're going to see something you've never seen before, but if you don't get there, you're not going to experience that. So
Yeah.
that's what I'm feeling from your book is you're going to give us a better perspective and a different view of where we're at
Mhm.
outside of our situation, which could encourage us to take that next corner and see what's coming up next. And that's what I love about why you wrote this book. That means so much to me as a fellow guy, father, again, struggling as well. I really identify with your comment about being in a public space and then coming home and feeling empty. That happens to me quite a lot. And I've never really been able to put a pin in that the way you have. And it
Mhm.
really, that encourages me to hear you say that. So whether you're talking to hundreds of people at a library or in a parking lot or one guy on a podcast, you're still sharing the same message. So I know in the busyness of life, you don't have time to go and push the book and speak on big stages, but you're doing it for me and you're doing it for the people listening right now. And we never know who's going to hear this podcast, right? And that's
That's exactly
exciting,
right.
right?
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. One person hears the message and decides to take action. Um, that's a victory, and that's what life's all about. It's about the connection, the really tight connection that we need to have with each other as we move through the world. And it can be as simple as going to somebody at a cash register at a supermarket and saying, "Hey, good morning," or "I like your shirt," or whatever. Right? It's different than just moving through the world and not interacting with each other. And for me, the point you just made is an important one. When you come back home and you've left the world, so to speak, and you're feeling lonely, you know what? Being lonely is okay. Like feeling lonely is okay. Being alone is okay. Having alone time is okay. But not blowing it out of proportion where it becomes this thing that, you've got to separate yourself and isolate yourself from the people around you. That's when it becomes dangerous. And so for me, that was an uncomfortable feeling for a very long time because I had wanted to be alone for so long. It took me some time to understand that, being alone is okay. And having the connection with yourself is just as important as having a connection with anybody else.
Right. I love it. So do you have a coffee sponsor for your book?
I don't, but that's a great idea. I love it. I'll have to give you some royalties for
There
that
you
one.
go. There you go. Just have somebody sponsor. If you're a coffee company and you want to sponsor this book, you need to reach out because that's a great thing. I love that. Uh, okay, Jim, just before we go, I have another question for you at the end. But before we go, where is everybody going to find you? Continue the conversation. I would love to if people can find out speaking dates in the future, all of that good information. Where would we go to find and connect with you?
I love that. So the website is there'scoffeeinthefridge.com. I have an Instagram page, which I mentioned, Coffee in the Fridge. You can go to Amazon and search for the book. There's Coffee in the Fridge. It'll pop up. It's on Amazon. Those are probably the three best places to find me. And my email contact and all my information is there on those locations. And I would love it if people, searched me out and got in touch with me for either speaking engagements or just to connect. That would be great.
So for the people listening and there's someone in their life that is struggling. They don't really understand what they're struggling with, but they know there's something going on. From your wife's point of view or your best friend's point of view, what kind of suggestions would you have for somebody who has someone in their life that's struggling in this way on how we can be effective, reach out in a loving way, and show that support to someone who's struggling the way you were prior to going into the hospital? Is there anything that you would give as a word of wisdom to somebody?
Well, I think that it's interesting. I traded text messages this morning with somebody I've known for 30 years, and he just bought 5 copies of the book for friends that he thinks would get some value out of it. And he just wrote a note on the inside of the book and said, "I'd love for you to read this and talk to me about it."
Nice.
That was it. And I think that's a really good message, right?
Okay.
It's hard for us to watch somebody that's struggling and then want to fix it. Right. I'm not a mental health professional. I don't have the tools to sit down and professionally help someone. I can certainly say, I'm here to talk to you.
Yeah.
I'm here to listen without judgment. I don't even need to talk. And I think that is a huge opening for people. So if somebody sat down with me and said, 15, 20 years ago, just talk to me. I won't judge you. I don't even need to respond. That would open me up. The thing that I think is difficult for somebody who is suffering from depression or anxiety is when somebody says, you need to do this. You have to do this. You got to get out in the sun. You got to do this. Hearing that shuts me down.
Right.
Just be here for me. And I think that really is the important message, is just be there, just listen. And if you think the book will help, give it to them. But you can't make a requirement around reading it, right? It's just got to say, I'd love for you to experience this. And if you want to talk about it afterward, great.
Awesome. Jim, I really appreciate you making time to be on the podcast. We had a little technology thing going on at the beginning, which wasn't my fault, and I apologize for that, but you stuck with me, and this is a topic that I think needs to be commonplace in our vocabulary and how we treat people. And I think there's more people than we really would care to know that are struggling in this way. And if we can have a book like yours that kind of puts this out into the public and makes people think and talk, that response, again, I love going back to that in the parking lot of the library and people waiting to speak to you. You have something here, and your story is amazing. And I love, again, going back to the fact that you don't have to wait to the end of the race to write your book or write your story. You can write it as you're running. I love that. It's great.
Yeah, I love that too. That's awesome. Yeah.
Really good. I love it. So everyone go grab a cup of coffee. It's in the fridge, and grab the book, head out onto the patio or the porch and read this. And again, I love your idea, Jim, too, of your friend that just went and purchased copies and sent them out to people. What a great gift. It's a gift more than a book. It's life, and it's a conversation starter. And I love that idea. So go buy many copies and just start shipping them out from Jim. I really appreciate your time, Jim. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. I appreciate it. Have a great day.
Excellent. Jumping here at the very end, I want to thank you for coming. We have listeners around the world, and I got to tell you, as a podcaster, it is so great to hear back from the people who listen to the show. Now, you are still here. The podcast's over. Like, we're sweeping up and putting the chairs away. You're still here. So, hi. I would love to talk to you. No, I really, really would. I would love to hear your voice. I would love to hear from you through email. You can do all that at livingthenextchapter.com. I say it fast because I love it. Living the Next Chapter. It's the name of the podcast. .com. How's that for easy? Right? Right. So come on over there and let's have a conversation. You can set up time in my calendar. You can, air quote here, book. Book time in my calendar. Book next chapter. Let's have a conversation. Thanks for being here. See you on the next one. Cheers.
Mindshift Power Podcast, the podcast for teenagers and those who work with them. There's a huge problem in America today. There's a very large disconnect between teenagers and the adults who work with them. I'm looking to bridge that gap with real, raw, honest conversation, not held back by the chains of political correctness. You cannot solve a problem you do not understand. Want to understand teenagers today? listen to this podcast. This podcast is for teens in the U.S. and Canada. To learn more, go to fatimabay.com/podcast or just look for Mind Shift Power Podcast on any listening platform. I look forward to you being a faithful listener.